Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into a really fierce debate. We're talking about the soul of a nation here. We're going to unpack two powerful and totally conflicting stories that try to explain what went so wrong in Mozambique. All right, so our story kicks off with something straight out of a thriller, a really brutal, shocking murder. Picture this. It's August 2001 in Maputo, the capital of Mozambique. The president of a major bank, a guy named António Macamo, is found dead. And get this, he's at the bottom of a 15-story stairwell inside his own bank.
Now, this wasn't just some random act of violence. Siba, he was the new guy, brought in just months earlier to clean up a bank that was absolutely drowning in fraudulent loans. His death, and you have to remember, this came just a year after a top investigative journalist, Carlos Cardoso, was also assassinated. Together, these events became this horrifying symbol of a complete ethical collapse. So the question is, how did it get to this point? What was really going on?
And that question, well, that leads us right into our first major theory. This one comes from an author and journalist named Joseph Hanlon, and his argument is pretty explosive. He says that what happened in Mozambique, it wasn't just an accident, and it wasn't just bad management. No, he claims it was a deliberate, calculated recolonization. So what does he mean by that? Well, Hanlon's core idea is that powerful outside forces, we're talking about the IMF and the World Bank, they basically engineered a whole system where corruption wasn't just some unfortunate side effect. He says it was the main tool, a weapon used to control the country and make sure its wealth served foreign interests. So you can see how this whole debate really boils down to two completely different stories, right? On one hand, you have Hanlon's thesis. Was this whole crisis forced on Mozambique from the outside, like a new kind of colonialism? Or on the other hand, did the problem grow from the inside, from issues that were already there? Okay, so if you're Hanlon, the primary weapon in this whole takeover was a strategy called shock therapy. You've got to remember the context here. Mozambique was just coming out of a devastating war. It was incredibly vulnerable. And that's when the IMF and the World Bank came in and just aggressively pushed these super radical free market policies onto an economy that was already completely shattered. Hanlon literally lays it out like a 4-step playbook, a recipe for creating a state run by oligarchs. Step 1, you impose crippling austerity measures. Step 2, you force the country to privatize its state-owned companies at lightning speed, often selling them for pennies on the dollar. Step 3, this creates a brand new class of local elites who are totally on board with the plan. And finally, step 4, that new elite helps extract the nation's wealth and send it overseas. And these new elites, they have a specific name in Hanlon's theory: comprador oligarchs. So who are these people? Well, ironically, they often came from the ruling Socialist Party. They used their political connections to grab control of all those newly privatized companies. But here's the kicker. They weren't interested in building up Mozambique's economy. Their job was to be the local middleman for big international corporations. Now, here's maybe the most damning part of Hanlon's argument. It's not about what happened, but what didn't happen. It's like that Sherlock Holmes story, the dog that didn't bark. He points to the absolute, deafening silence from the international community. Think about it. Journalists are being murdered, bankers are being thrown down stairwells, and the big international donors and institutions, they barely said a word. For Hanlon, that silence isn't just an oversight. It's proof they were in on it. Okay, so that's a pretty compelling case, right? But it's only one side of the story. A lot of Mozambican scholars push back on this. They say that Hanlon's theory, as powerful as it is, totally misses a huge piece of the puzzle: the enemy within. Professor António Francisco, for one, comes out swinging. He basically argues that this whole recolonization idea is a convenient excuse. It's a way for Mozambique's own ruling class to point the finger at outsiders and completely dodge any responsibility for their own massive failures. Francisco says Hanlon ignores what he calls the socialist elephant in the room. His point is, you can't just start the clock when the IMF shows up. You have to look back at the authoritarian state that was built right after independence. Francisco argues that that system had already created institutions that were all about extracting wealth and keeping power in the hands of a few. This was all happening way before shock therapy was even a thing. And the criticism gets even more pointed. Francisco accuses Hanlon of what he calls calculated evasion. It's like this. He says Hanlon does an amazing job of describing the crime scene, He paints this incredibly vivid picture of a corrupt system. But then, when it's time to name the suspects, the stage is empty. He denounces the system, but never points to the actual people, the ones with tax ID numbers, who got rich from it. Another scholar, Professor Elísio Macamo, takes this even further. He argues that this whole narrative about being recolonized, it actually infantilizes Mozambicans. It turns them into passive victims, just things that history happens to. He says it completely strips them of their own agency and ignores the really complex internal political games that were being played. And this gets to a really crucial point: the difference between just describing what you see and actually analyzing why it's happening. Macamo's take is that Hanlon is brilliant at describing the symptoms, the stolen wealth, the violence, the fact that no one gets punished. But what he doesn't do is analyze the deep-down political logic that makes all of this happen. Why does this system make sense for the people running it? So there you have it, two really powerful, completely opposite views. Was it external manipulation or was it internal decay? So who's right? Well, what if that's the wrong question? That's what another analyst, Edgar Barroso, suggests. Barroso brings in this great concept called structural complicity. Here's the idea. The pressure from the outside, all those neoliberal policies, they didn't just create corruption from nothing. What they did was they found the weaknesses that were already there inside Mozambique's power structure, and they exploited them. It's like they created this toxic feedback loop where the outside pressure and the inside problems just kept feeding off each other, making everything worse. And this really offers us a way to make sense of it all. Barroso says we're looking at a false dichotomy. We don't have to choose between blaming outsiders and blaming insiders. It's not one or the other. You can see Hanlon's work as this powerful, fact-based denunciation of what outsiders did. And you can see the critics' work as the essential analysis of what was happening on the inside. They're two sides of the same coin. Which, in the end, leaves us with this massive, incredibly difficult question that isn't just about Mozambique, but about so many countries around the world. Where does that external pressure actually end, and where does internal responsibility truly begin? It's about that tangled, messy relationship between global forces and local choices, and trying to find the line between them is, well, maybe impossible.